What's going on, everyone? Welcome back, all you Star Trek fans, and, well, probably actually a lot of current Star Trek haters out there. With the impending premiere of Star Trek Strange New Worlds and the inevitable demise of Star Trek Picard Season 2, I've been thinking to myself, what exactly am I looking for in a new Star Trek series, or just in Star Trek going forward? Am I looking for it to be canceled and wiped off the face of the earth? No, not exactly. Do I have high hopes that what's going to come from Star Trek in the next couple of years and the next couple of iterations will take us back to that classic golden age? No, I don't necessarily have those hopes either. But what would be leading us on a path in the right direction, for lack of a better terminology? What am I looking for? What do I think would help improve things from where we currently stand? Now, I want to say this is firmly in the live-action realm, because Lower Decks, for what it is, a comedy series, an adult-oriented comedy series, not really canon. It doesn't have to adhere to, set fast rules in much the same way. It's fine for what it is. Prodigy, for a kid's show, actually, I'm finding it fairly enjoyable. That might be my favorite of the new crop of Star Trek. I know that's not saying much, but it seems to be striking the right balance of children's stuff and Star Trek type nostalgia. Now, granted, a lot of that might have to do with the fact that I am definitely a Voyager fan, but that is what it is. So, a couple of things that I believe are vitally important if we're going to turn the car around, so to speak. Picard. Big problems going on in Picard. Not as much in Discovery, but there were a couple in Discovery, and that is respect and just an overall caring for pre-established characters. Now, I understand for Picard, there's been a lot of in-universe time between the last time we saw Picard, 7 of 9, Icheb, Hugh, Guinan, Soong, although the Soongs we hadn't really met before. Any of the returning, recurring characters from Legacy Star Trek, as I'll call it from here on out. Obviously, things would have changed. Lives would have gone separate ways. People would have changed their beliefs. But in Picard in particular, they seem to have lost the respect for those original characters. Picard doesn't seem to have grown from the Picard that we knew in Next Generation, or even the Picard we knew in the movies. Obviously, those were supposedly the same character, even though in the movies he kind of skewed more towards an action hero type of person. But he does not have any of the gravitas, he does not have any of the resolve, he does not have any of the leadership ability, he does not have any of the convictions, he does not have any of the Shakespeare quotes, he does not have any of the flawed but still morally right type of human being. All of the things that we were led to believe Picard was from, let's just say, Season 3 forward of Next Generation, because obviously there is a pretty big gap between Season 1 and 2 Picard and Season 3 Picard, which sort of can be rectified between, the whole Borg assimilation thing and just the writers finding their feet between Seasons 2 and 3. That whole situation took care of itself. But we saw 40 some odd episodes between the first season of Picard kind of growing and changing, even when it was episodic. So yes, there's been some discrepancies in characters in the past. Obviously, I'm not expecting those to go away. But we need to have respect for what came before and not just throw things out the window. Even if it's not a character you liked, like let's say you're not a big fan of Icheb. I wasn't the biggest fan. I didn't like him. I didn't dislike him. He was just a fine addition to Voyager. He never really contributed much. He had a rough go of it. And he was just kind of a nice side character. Liked some of the stories he was in, but I wouldn't say he's the greatest Star Trek character ever. To just dispose of him in the way they did in Star Trek Picard Season 1 is, to me, and I know this is, a long list of problems, is one of the worst attacks against Legacy Star Trek they could have done. It wasn't in service of a fantastic story they were telling. It was basically a plot point to have 7 of 9 have a character arc that really didn't pertain to the story, really didn't matter in the end of things, and was wrapped up and kind of moved on from. And then they have the sheer gall in season 2 to say 7 of 9 wasn't allowed in Starfleet because she was Borg, when they showed us clearly a scene of Icheb being murdered because he was a Borg in Starfleet with a Starfleet uniform. Had been a shining example of an eager Starfleet member. So they show us something horrible that none of us wanted to see, and then contradict their own canon of their own show a mere season later. So if they're not taking themselves seriously, how can we expect them to take prior Trek seriously? And I understand, 50 years of canon is difficult. I don't expect everyone to constantly and continuously get every minute piece of Star Trek canon perfectly correct. Never contradict anything that's come before, especially if it's something that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But respect for what's come before, and respect for the fans and new fans as well as old fans. Obviously people that have been watching since the original series are going to have opinions and going to have feelings, and they're going to want Star Trek to be a certain way, and not all of them are always going to be on board. But throughout that big gap from TOS to when TNG came on, not including the animated series and the movies, because those are kind of a separate deal, there was a big discrepancy. But TNG eventually won over a lot of TOS fans, and I would say created a ton of new Star Trek fans. Then you had DS9 and Voyager, which probably less so as far as developing new fans, but the people that stuck with it cared about it. They cared about the legacy of it. They cared about the crossovers. They cared about the characterizations in universe that kind of meshed with each other. Then you had Enterprise. People were a bit upset about that. Obviously, it was a prequel. Some of the things that established in canon contradicted the beta canon. But in the end, it won over a lot of Star Trek fans. The same cannot be said, I think, for a lot of the modern Trek. And I don't think they're trying to. And that is the difference. I believe that in current Star Trek, what they're trying to do is use, and I believe I've said this in another video, is use Star Trek, use science fiction as sort of a high school play backdrop to use the IP, use the iconography to tell whatever stories they want to. They're not actually interested in telling Star Trek stories. They're interested in telling whatever stories they want, but just so happen to have the Star Trek intellectual property in which to tell those stories. So, for instance, Star Trek Picard Season 2 very, very, very clearly is a story about childhood trauma and grief and unresolved feelings, unresolved problems, mental illness, all sorts of things. That's a story they wanted to tell. Obviously, part of this has to do with Patrick Stewart not wanting Picard to feel like the same Star Trek we had dealt with in the past, and that's another whole issue. This is sort of a cross between a Patrick Stewart end-of-life vanity project and some writers that are more interested in doing things like maybe a Riverdale-type show or a CW superhero show where, yes, they have the costumes, yes, they have the iconography, as I mentioned, but it's not really interested in telling that story. For instance, the last couple of seasons of The Flash, not necessarily interested in telling a story about the Flash being a superhero. It's the personal relationships between the Flash trying to talk the villain out of being a villain to be a good person, the interpersonal relationships between, the various couples they've established on the show, and occasionally they'll throw a couple costumes on and have a 2-3 minute fight. That's fine for what it is if that's the type of thing you want, but that's not the crux of why we like these things. We like to be exploring strange new worlds, telling stories through the lens of science fiction, a slightly skewed version of the reality we know. We don't want to see our own reality. So when Picard spends 8 out of 10 episodes basically in our own time period, 2 years in our future, commenting on current day, not through the lens of sci-fi, through the lens of, hey, look, it's an ice agent, or hey, look, global warming is causing a wildfire, or hey, look, there's a police brutally assaulting somebody. That's not escapism. That is not helping us grow through a metaphor or a simile or some sort of great breakdown of society through the lens of something that's not real. It's just basically showing us our own. It's holding up a mirror. It's not Black Mirror. It's just literally holding up a mirror and then saying, do better. Without telling us the fun story, which might actually help us rewire our minds and to think about things critically or to gain a new perspective, because we aren't seeing it through our own preconceived notions. We're seeing it through the lens of science fiction. And because of that, if you show a Klingon and a Romulan doing things that we're doing here, we might not feel so offended because we're not feeling personally attacked about something. We're seeing the same things filtered in a different light, and suddenly we can go, oh, that kind of applies to something in my own life. Now I'm having an epiphany about that. So I think respecting the prior characters, stories, obviously, the writing needs to get more concise and stronger. The technology they're introducing in these shows is not science fiction. It seems like magic. Even some of the technologies we've established don't make sense. Like, how do you clone an android from a neuron? Or how do you, this little wand device that can magically repair anything? Now, I'll give Discovery a slight pass as far as a programmable matter in the future, because they're trying to establish something so far in the future it doesn't make sense to us. So that's okay. I'm going to give that one thing a pass, just because how do you acknowledge something so far beyond us that it wouldn't make sense? I'll give that a plus. Something else that we need to do is Discovery, huge problem with this, is whisper talking. Every freaking character talks in a whisper talk. It's always like they're in the halls, like they can't speak up. It's always, when I came on this ship, but you were the best friend. Oh, well, we have 30 seconds left. There's a red alert. Hold on to that. Just want you to know what? 20 seconds left. You're the best friend. Thank you so much, Mr. Saru. 3 seconds left. Okay, we'll solve the problem now. It's just I want to see a return to the professionalism that we saw in a lot of classic Trek. Now, obviously, not every character is going to be a professional. We're going to have outliers. We're going to have great things like a Reginald Barclay, who doesn't fit to the mold of your average Starfleet officer, but he still has his own things to contribute. That's great. But when we've got an entire ship of supposedly quasi-military trained people, and they're always losing themselves in the moment, losing themselves, like I think of Rafi. She's a trained Starfleet officer who was recently reinstated to Starfleet, is, if not a commander of her own vessel, she's at least a first officer, and she's constantly flying off the handle because one person died. Now, I'm not saying that's not tragic. We shouldn't ever get numb to the loss of life, but come on. She's trained for this. Complete the mission. We've got time to grieve later. Obviously, if there's extenuating circumstances, like Decker in the original series, where his entire ship worth of crew were destroyed because he tried to save them by beaming them to a planet, obviously that's an extenuating circumstance where we could see somebody flip out and lose it. But these are they are trained Starfleet officers. By and large, they should all have a high level of professionalism, enable the ability to put the task, the mission first, instead of breaking down at every single moment, having conversations about their feelings every 5 minutes. That can be done later. That's what Counselor Troy was for. That's what Guinan was for. That's what all these things were done. Not during the mission. Accomplish the mission, have a level of professionalism, and then we will, once we've won the day, deal with the emotional trauma and the baggage that has come from that. And something else, speak like that as well. No more of this modern slang. I understand, it's a different writing style. I think it's all because of Joss Whedon, his whole philosophy back in Buffy. It's slowly been creeping its way in everything like the MCU. Everyone's got to have a sarcastic quip. Everyone's got to throw in modern day slang. That's not, it does not conduce itself. It's not even how you say that. It's not conducive to creating the environment of this structured, quasi-militarized, peaceful exploration agency as we've come to know it, when everyone's running around, saying things like a typical high schooler would say things today. They always spoke in these shows with a slightly heightened level of, I don't know how to say this because I'm not a linguist, but, they always had this level of speaking that was a little more proper, a little more structured, a little less everyday. And then you would have occasionally some non-commissioned people, some people you ran into at a bar, some Nausicaans or something, who would have a more casual way of speaking. But again, these are trained professional officers in a... I keep saying quasi-military because I know they don't want us to think that Starfleet is the military, even though the current shows tend to make us think that. But they should all have something of a higher level of professionalism and a higher level of language than, oh shit, son, woo, we did that, woo, I love science, man, woo. I don't know, and then using like sweet, cool, radical, well, maybe not radical, I don't think they've ever said that, but, they're not going to talk like a typical sitcom character from 2022 in the future, unless maybe you're Tom Paris because he was such a, not an Anglophile, what would that be? Such a 20th century-ophile, 21st century-ophile, and even he didn't really speak like that often. So these are just some of the problems. If they can address these, if they can bring back the respect, if they could do anything to get back on the right track and show us that they're taking lessons and trying to correct things, I don't think they can turn things around for Discovery, but I don't have a huge problem with that because, as far as I'm concerned, Discovery is not really taking place anywhere that involves anything anymore. I have hopes for Strange New Worlds. It seems like they've learned some lessons, and maybe by the end of season 1, we could see that they're heading in the right direction. I liked Rebecca Romaine. I liked Anson Mount. Can't say I was a huge fan of Ethan Peck as Spock, but when given the chance to have his own series not burdened with Michael Burnham, maybe he'll grow on me a little more. Don't know about the rest of the crew. Obviously, we really haven't seen much of them in action. Don't really mind the redesign of the ship. Obviously, things aren't going to look exactly the same unless they really, really wanted to commit to everything looking like classic Trek, which I don't think would vibe this day. So I don't have a big problem, I guess I should say, with everything looking differently. But anyways, these are just some rambling thoughts on what I think would help. And let me know what you have to say in the comments, and I'll see you back here for more reviews. And hopefully some great new Star Trek around the corner. Star Trek Picard's wrapping up season 2, so I'm not holding my breath for that. Strange New Worlds, I am. Until next time, computer and program.